The day has not started, but the battle already has. Before your phone lights up, before fear whispers its first threat, something unseen is fighting for control of your morning. What if the first 5 minutes decided the strength of the next 24 hours? This is not just a prayer, it is a strategy. A moment of silence that becomes surrender, authority, and victory. If you have ever felt rushed, anxious, or defeated before noon, this message is for you. Stay here, breathe, let Jesus meet you before the world does, and watch how everything changes. Your morning can rewrite your story starting today, right now with faith alone. The day has not yet begun, but the battle already has. Long before alarms ring and streets come alive, an unseen conflict is already unfolding in the quiet spaces of the morning. While the world appears still, fear begins to whisper its first threats, anxiety rehearses worst-case scenarios, and distraction waits patiently to steal focus. This is not a physical war, but a spiritual one, silent, relentless, and strategic, targeting the mind and heart at the most vulnerable moment. The instant we wake up, reports from the inner life reveal a consistent pattern. The first thoughts of the day rarely arrive neutral. They arrive charged, with worry about the future, regret from yesterday, pressure to perform, and temptation to delay what truly matters. Before feet touch the floor, the soul is already being negotiated over. This is where many lose the day without ever realizing it, surrendering peace before the first hour even begins. Observers of faith note that mornings are decisive not because they are calm, but because they are contested. Darkness does not wait for convenience. It moves early. It understands that a distracted morning often produces a defeated afternoon. When prayer is postponed, fear takes the microphone. When Jesus is ignored, chaos begins to write the schedule. The enemy does not need a full day, only a careless beginning. Yet in the middle of this invisible struggle stands a powerful truth. The presence of Jesus is already awake. While anxiety rushes forward, Christ remains steady. While temptation shouts, his voice remains constant. The battle before sunrise is not proof of weakness. It is evidence of value. The intensity of resistance reveals the importance of the moment. Something significant is at stake every morning, and heaven knows it. Spiritual analysts agree on one urgent conclusion. How the day is started determines how it will be survived. A rush beginning often leads to reactive living, where emotions rule and peace collapses under pressure. But a surrender beginning, one anchored in Christ, reshapes the entire trajectory of the day. Prayer is not a ritual here. It is a strategic response to a real threat. As dawn approaches, the question remains unresolved for every soul. Who will take control first? Fear or faith? Distraction or devotion? The battle before sunrise does not announce itself loudly, but its consequences echo through every decision that follows. And in this critical hour, the choice to begin the day with Jesus is not merely spiritual. It is survival. As the battle before sunrise begins to settle, another reality quietly emerges. The world is still asleep, but heaven is fully awake. After fear's first whispers and anxiety's early threats, there comes a fragile window of silence. Streets are empty, notifications are quiet, and the noise of expectation has not yet arrived. This silence is not accidental. It is strategic. It is the moment when God speaks most clearly, before the world demands attention. Continuing from the unseen warfare of the early morning, this chapter reports on a truth often overlooked. Silence itself becomes a battleground. Distraction does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it waits patiently for noise to return. In these early minutes, the soul stands at a crossroads, either fill the silence with God's presence or to let it be invaded by restless thoughts and unfiltered worries. Witnesses of spiritual discipline confirm that God's voice rarely competes with chaos. He does not shout over the noise of schedules, responsibilities, and digital urgency. Instead, he waits. In the stillness of the morning, when the heart is unguarded and the mind is not yet hardened, his voice moves gently but decisively. This is where clarity is born, before confusion takes control. Yet many miss this moment. The silence feels uncomfortable, even threatening. Without noise, unresolved fears surface. Without distraction, inner struggles speak louder. This is why so many rush to fill the quiet. Scrolling, rushing, planning, never realizing they're silencing the very guidance they desperately need. The world's silence becomes wasted ground instead of holy ground. Reports from those who linger in the quiet tell a different story. In silence, peace does not arrive instantly. It settles gradually. God begins to separate truth from lies, urgency from importance, fear from faith. What felt overwhelming minutes earlier starts to shrink. The problems remain, but their power weakens. Silence becomes a place where the soul exhales. After recognizing the battle, silence becomes a strategy. The enemy thrives in noise and haste, but God moves in stillness and surrender. The morning quiet is not emptiness. It is invitation. An invitation to listen before speaking, to receive before acting, to trust before controlling. Spiritual observers note that when Jesus is welcomed into the silence, direction replaces panic. Decisions become clearer, emotions stabilize, and the heart aligns itself with eternity rather than urgency. The silence does not remove the day's challenges, but it reframes them. What once felt threatening now feels manageable in God's presence. There is also a warning in this report. Silence ignored does not return easily. Once the day accelerates, voices multiply, demands stack, interruptions dominate. The opportunity to hear God becomes harder to reclaim. This is why the morning silence carries weight. It is time-sensitive and irreplaceable. As the world begins to wake, the silence slowly fades. But those who met God within it carry something forward, an inner stillness that noise cannot steal. The voice heard in the quiet echoes throughout the day, reminding the heart of truth when pressure rises and faith is tested. The battle before sunrise exposes a need for God, but silence creates the space to encounter him. The war begins early, but so does divine guidance. And in the quiet moments before the world speaks, God is already giving instructions for victory. The morning silence is not merely the absence of sound. It is the presence of God waiting to be acknowledged. Those who listen here do not walk into the day unprepared. They walk forward carrying a voice stronger than fear, steadier than anxiety, and louder than the chaos that awaits. After the silence of the early morning has spoken and God's voice has begun to surface, a new stage of the spiritual report unfolds. The heart, now awakened and attentive, reveals what has been carrying all along. Beneath calm breaths and quiet prayers lie heavy burdens, unspoken fears, unresolved pain, hidden exhaustion, the transfer of weight from human strength to divine hands. Continuing from the stillness where God speaks, the soul now stands exposed. Silence has a way of uncovering what noise conceals. Concerns about finances, relationships, health, purpose, and failure rise to the surface. These are not small distractions. They are crushing weights accumulated over days, months, and even years. The morning becomes the first checkpoint where these burdens demand attention. Spiritual observers describe this moment as deeply emotional and intensely vulnerable. Many attempt to carry everything alone, mistaking endurance for faith. Jesus never asked his followers to be strong without him. The act of laying burdens at his feet is not surrendering responsibility. It is choosing the right source of strength. Reports indicate that resistance often appears here. The mind argues that problems must be solved before peace can arrive. Fear insists that letting go is dangerous. Control disguises itself as wisdom. Yet, in this moment, Jesus stands unmoved, inviting the weary to come closer, not with answers, but with honesty. As burdens are released through prayer, something shifts internally. The problems do not vanish instantly, but their grip loosens. Anxiety loses authority. Shame weakens. Hope, once buried under pressure, begins to breathe again. This is not emotional escape. It is spiritual realignment. The weight was never meant to be carried alone. The battle before sunrise revealed the threat. The silence revealed God's voice. Now, surrender becomes a response. Without this step, silence turns into self-reflection only. With surrender, it becomes transformation. The morning prayer moves from listening to releasing. Eyewitness accounts from lives shaped by this practice confirm a pattern. When burdens are laid down early, reactions later in the day change. Anger softens. Patience increases. Decisions become less driven by fear. The morning act of surrender quietly rewrites the emotional script of the entire day. There is urgency in this report. Burdens carried into the day grow heavier with every hour. Pressure multiplies. Fatigue compounds. But burdens surrendered early lose momentum. Jesus does not drag them through the day. He holds them completely. What begins as prayer ends as freedom. This chapter also exposes a powerful contrast. Those who skip the surrender often return to the same anxieties by nightfall, exhausted and discouraged. Those who release their burdens early may still face challenges, but they face them unburdened. The difference is not circumstance. It is positioning. As morning advances and responsibilities approach, the soul that is surrendered stands lighter. Shoulders relax. Breathing deepens. The heart no longer races ahead in fear. What was once overwhelming is now entrusted. This is not denial of reality. It is confidence in Christ. The report closes with defining conclusion. Laying burdens at the feet of Jesus is the turning point of the morning. It is where listening becomes trusting and trusting becomes peace. The day may still be demanding, but the soul no longer carries it alone. From this moment forward, Jesus carries what once threatened to crush the heart. Observers note a vulnerable gap that follows release. When fear and anxiety are removed, the heart does not remain neutral. It awaits filling. If God's presence does not occupy the space, old worries quickly return. Emphasizes that freedom must be maintained intentionally, not passively. Spiritual analysts describe God's presence as more than comfort. It is covering. Faith wraps around uncertainty. Peace settles over restless thoughts. Humility replaces pride, and trust displaces a need for control. This is not metaphor alone. It is preparation. The soul is being armored before stepping into unpredictable terrain. The morning prayer now shifts tone. No longer is it only about surrender, but about alignment. Jesus is invited not just to carry burdens, but to shape character. Words spoken in prayer become declarations. Strength over weakness, wisdom over confusion, love over irritation. Each declaration is like a garment placed carefully upon the heart. They have released their burdens, but have not clothed themselves in God's presence. Without spiritual covering, external pressures penetrate easily. A single comment can trigger anger. A minor setback can reopen fear. Clothing the soul prevents these breaches. Witnesses to this practice report a noticeable transformation. The pace of the day feels different. Reaction slow. Discernment sharpens. Instead of being pulled by emotion, the heart stands anchored. God's presence becomes not a moment, but an atmosphere carried forward. The framework becomes clearer here. The battle before sunrise demanded awareness. Silence invited God's voice. Surrender removed the weight. Now, clothing oneself with God's presence prepares the believer for engagement. The morning is no longer defensive. It becomes strategic. There is also a warning embedded in this report. Spiritual clothing is not automatic. It requires intention. Skip preparation often leads to spiritual exposure. But those who dress their spirit deliberately walk into the day covered, guarded, and ready. As the world begins to accelerate, the contrast becomes evident. Chaos rushes, but the clothed soul remains steady. Pressure builds, but peace holds. The presence of Jesus becomes the unseen shield that absorbs impact without breaking the heart beneath it. You do not face the day as you are. You face it as you are prepared. Clothing yourself with God's presence is not optional. It is essential. And those who wear it step into the day not merely surviving, but standing strong. The report ends with a quiet confidence. The soul is dressed. The heart is guarded. The day may bring storms, but the believer does not enter exposed. Wrapped in God's presence, they move forward, ready for whatever lies ahead. With the soul now clothed in God's presence, the morning advances into its most assertive phase. No longer merely listening, surrendering, or receiving, the believer begins to speak. Words rise not from emotion, but from alignment with Jesus. Before the day can speak its demands, victory is declared in advance. Observers note a growing confidence that does not originate from circumstances. It is rooted in identity. When the heart is covered by God's presence, fear loses its authority to dictate outcomes. The morning prayer becomes a moment of spiritual legislation, where truth is spoken over the hours ahead. Reports confirm that what is spoken early shapes what is experienced later. When a day begins in silence and surrender but remains unspoken, challenges often return louder. But when victory is declared, peace over chaos, strength over weakness, clarity over confusion, the soul establishes spiritual boundaries. The day is no longer entered passively. It is confronted with faith. This chapter emphasizes that declaration is not denial. Problems are not ignored. They are positioned under Christ's authority. Jesus is not invited to follow the day's events. He is placed ahead of them. This act reframes a believer's role from reactor to participant in God's purposes. Spiritual analysts highlight a key truth. The enemy listens. Fear feeds on uncertainty, but it retreats when confronted with faith-filled words. Declaring victory early disrupts the cycle of doubt that usually builds momentum throughout the day. What might become overwhelming later is weakened before it can form. Eyewitness testimonies describe the impact of these declarations. The day still presents resistance, but it feels different. Pressure does not panic the heart. Delays do not dismantle hope. Setbacks do not erase purpose. The declarations spoken in the morning echo quietly, reminding the soul of truth when emotions begin to waver. The battle before sunrise revealed the threat. Silence created awareness. Surrender released the weight. Clothing provided protection. Now, declaration establishes authority. Each step builds upon the last, forming a complete spiritual posture for the day. There is urgency in this phase. If victory is not declared, fear often declares first. The world speaks loudly, and without intentional proclamation, its voice dominates. Morning declarations are not optional affirmations. They are defenses against the narratives that will attempt to control the day. As the sun rises higher, the believer steps forward carrying words already spoken. These words act like anchors, preventing drift when circumstances change. Faith no longer waits for results. It stands firm in advance of them. The report concludes with a decisive statement. Victory is not claimed at the end of the day, but established at the beginning. Those who declare victory with Jesus before the struggle begins do not walk into uncertainty unarmed. They move forward grounded in truth, speaking life into every moment before the day has a chance to speak back. After victory has been declared and the tone of the day has been set, the report moves into the lived reality of the morning prayer. Words spoken in faith now demand continuity and action. Declaring victory is powerful, but walking with Jesus sustains it. The prayer does not end when the morning quiet fades. It follows the believer into every hour that unfolds. Building on the authority established, observers note that the day now tests what was declared. Responsibilities arrive, conversations begin, and unexpected pressures surface. This is where many disconnect, leaving Jesus in the prayer moment rather than carrying him forward. This chapter exposes that gap and calls for a constant, active awareness of Christ's presence. Spiritual reports indicate that walking with Jesus is not dramatic or loud. It is steady and intentional. It appears in small decisions, guarded responses, and quiet obedience. Each hour becomes a continuation of prayer, where faith is practiced rather than merely professed. The presence once felt in silence now moves into motion, emphasizes that distractions intensify as the day progresses. Declared victory is challenged by deadlines, demands, and interruptions. Without conscious connection to Jesus, the heart slowly drifts back towards self-reliance. Walking with him requires returning, again and again, to the truth established in the morning. Eyewitness accounts describe a noticeable difference when Jesus is intentionally acknowledged throughout the day. Stressful moments do not escalate as quickly. Temptations lose urgency. Choices feel guided rather than forced. The believer becomes responsive instead of reactive, carrying peace into places that once trigger anxiety. The framework reaches a deeper level here. The battle before sunrise prepared awareness. Silence created connection. Surrender released burdens. Clothing provided covering. Declaration established authority. Now, walking with Jesus transforms preparation into lifestyle. The morning prayer becomes a foundation, not the limit, of spiritual engagement. This chapter also addresses fatigue. As hours pass, emotional and mental energy decreases. Walking with Jesus does not remove tiredness, but it prevents exhaustion from turning into discouragement. Strength is replenished in moments of quiet acknowledgement, brief prayers, inward trust, and remembered truth. Observers report that when Jesus is carried through the day, setbacks lose finality. Mistakes become moments of grace rather than condemnation. Failures do not end the story. Walking with Christ keeps the heart aligned with mercy instead of shame. As afternoon approaches, the fruit of this practice becomes visible. Peace remains intact. Focus sharpens. Faith holds its ground even when circumstances shift. The declarations made in the morning are no longer just words. They are embodied. Victory is not maintained by memory, but by movement with Jesus. Walking with him through every hour ensures that what was established in prayer is preserved in practice. The day does not outrun faith. It unfolds alongside Christ, step by step. As the day advances and momentum builds, this chapter reports on a predictable yet critical development. Faith is tested. What was established in the quiet of the morning now faces the pressure of reality. Before noon arrives, unexpected resistance often appears. Interruptions, disappointments, sharp words, sudden delays. This is the moment when faith is no longer theoretical. It is examined under stress. Continuing directly from walking with Jesus through every hour, observers note that tests rarely arrive dramatically. They come subtly, disguised as inconvenience or frustration. A plan falls apart. A conversation turns tense. An answer does not come as expected. These moments challenge whether the believer will continue walking with Christ or revert to old reactions. Spiritual reports indicate that this stage is intentional. Faith must be challenged to be strengthened. The enemy does not need to erase the morning prayer, only to make it feel irrelevant. Doubt whispers that prayer did not work, that peace was temporary, that faith was misplaced. This chapter exposes that tactic clearly. Eyewitness accounts reveal that the strongest pressure often comes before midday, when energy begins to dip and patience wears thin. It is here that the declarations of victory. The soul is asked a difficult question. Will you trust what you declared or what you now feel? Emphasizes a powerful truth within the framework. The test is not a sign of failure, but confirmation of effectiveness. If the morning prayer had no impact, it would not be challenged. Resistance reveals that something meaningful was set in motion. Faith is being refined, not rejected. Observers also note a critical decision point. When faith is tested, the believer can either react emotionally or respond spiritually. Reaction feeds frustration. Response draws strength from Jesus. Even a brief inward prayer, remembering silence, surrender, and declaration, can shift the moment entirely. Reports from lives shaped by this practice show that those who endure this test experience a quiet victory. The situation may not change instantly, but the heart does. Calm replaces irritation. Trust steadies anxiety. The soul remains anchored, proving that the morning prayer was not fragile. It was foundational, connects deeply to the framework's progression. The morning built awareness, alignment, and authority. Now, before noon, endurance is required. Faith matures when it is exercised under pressure, not protected from it. There is also a warning issued in this report. Ignoring these tests often leads to spiritual erosion later in the day. Small compromises multiply. Peace leaks away unnoticed. But those who stand firm here preserve strength for what lies ahead. As midday approaches, the believer who has endured stands quietly stronger. The test did not defeat faith. It clarified it. What was prayed in the morning has now been lived, not just believed. Faith tested before noon determines resilience for the rest of the day. Those who hold their ground here do not collapse later. They move forward proven, strengthened, and prepared, ready for the final stage of the journey that still awaits. As the day continues beyond its early trials, the report reaches its final and most revealing chapter. After faith has been tested and proven before noon, a transformation becomes visible. The believer who began the morning in battle, silence, surrender, preparation, declaration, and endurance now rises with purpose. This chapter documents the outcome of a well-guarded morning, a life that carries light into a world still struggling in shadow. Building directly from the tested faith, observers note a quiet but undeniable shift. The believer is no longer merely surviving the day. They are influencing it. Peace that was once internal now becomes external. Calm responses replace reactive ones. Presence replaces pressure. The morning prayer begins to show fruit, not just within the soul, but through visible impact. Spiritual reports indicate that darkness is not always dramatic. It often appears as confusion, bitterness, exhaustion, and fear in ordinary places. Offices, homes, streets, and conversations carry unseen weight. Into these environments steps the believer, not with loud words, but with a steady spirit shaped by Jesus. Light does not announce itself. It reveals itself. This chapter emphasizes that rising as light is not about perfection, but consistency. The believer still faces limitations, but they are no longer ruled by them. What was anchored in silence now holds firm in noise. What was surrendered in prayer now resists temptation. The framework of the morning becomes the backbone of the entire day. Eyewitness accounts confirm that others notice the difference. Tension softens in conversations. Conflict de-escalates. Hope emerges where frustration once dominated. The believer becomes a living testimony that time with Jesus in the morning was not symbolic. It was transformational. Observers also note that this light is often most powerful in contrast. While others are rushed, the believer is steady. While others are reactive, the believer is discerning. While others are discouraged, the believer remains anchored. This contrast does not elevate pride. It magnifies Christ. The framework now completes its arc. The battle before sunrise awakened urgency. Silence created intimacy. Surrender released burdens. Clothing provided covering. Declaration established authority. Walking sustained faith. Testing refined endurance. Now, rising as light fulfills the purpose of it all. The morning prayer was never meant to end with the individual. It was meant to overflow. Light must be maintained. Without returning to Jesus, even light dims over time. But those who begin their day rightly find it easier to end it faithfully. The morning becomes the source from which the entire day draws strength. As evening approaches, the believer does not collapse in defeat, but reflects in gratitude. The day may not have been easy, but it was not wasted. The light carried was real. The peace sustained was earned through surrender and trust. The report concludes with a powerful final declaration. When the day begins with Jesus, it does not end in darkness. Those who rise with him in the morning become light by afternoon and testimony by night. The world may remain troubled, but the believer stands unwavering. Proof that starting the day right with Jesus changes everything. As the day finally slows and night begins to fall, the report enters its closing chapter. One that looks backward to understand what truly shaped the outcome. After rising as light in a dark world, the believer now stands at day's end with clarity. This chapter reveals a powerful realization. The way the night feels is determined by how the morning began. Continuing from a visible impact, described observers note that exhaustion may be present, but defeat is not. The body is tired, yet the spirit remains steady. The pressures of the day did not disappear, but they did not dominate. This outcome is traced directly back to the earliest hours, when the battle was acknowledged and Jesus was invited in first. Spiritual analysts describe nightfall as a mirror. It reflects the choices made throughout the day, especially the first one. Those who rush past the morning often arrive at night restless and heavy. But those who began with silence, surrender, and declaration arrive with peace, even if answers are incomplete. The soul recognizes it was not alone. Reflection is not regret when the day was rooted in prayer. Mistakes become lessons, not accusations. Weak moments become reminders of grace, not sources of shame. Walking with Jesus throughout the day transforms the night into a place of gratitude rather than guilt. Eyewitness accounts reveal that peace at night is not accidental. It is accumulated. Each hour walked with Christ deposits calm into the soul. Each test endured strengthens confidence. By the time night arrives, faith no longer questions whether God was present. It knows he was. The framework now reveals its full cycle. The battle before sunrise demanded awareness. Silence invited God's voice. Surrender released burdens. Clothing provided protection. Declaration established authority. Walking sustained connection. Testing refined faith. Rising as light fulfilled purpose. Now, Reflection confirms transformation. The day did not happen randomly. It unfolded intentionally. There is also a warning carried in this chapter. Nights that end in unrest often point to mornings that began without grounding. This is not condemnation, but invitation. Tomorrow offers another beginning. Another chance to start again with Jesus before the noise returns. Observers note that those who end the day in peace sleep differently. Rest is deeper. Anxiety loosens its grip. Trust replaces mental rehearsal of problems. The soul rests not because everything is solved, but because everything is entrusted. As the final moment of the day passes, the believer does not collapse into distraction, but closes with quiet acknowledgement, a whispered thanks, a surrendered breath. The same Jesus welcomed at dawn is honored at dusk, completing the circle of the day. Mornings shape days, and days shape lives. When the day begins with Jesus, the night ends with peace. And when the night ends in peace, the soul is ready to rise again, prepare to face a new sunrise, a new battle, and the same faithful presence waiting once more. As the night settles and reflection gives way to rest, this chapter reports on a truth that extends beyond a single day. The journey does not end at sleep. What was learned, endured, and proven now prepares a believer for what comes next. This chapter marks a transition from completion to continuation, the understanding that every ending quietly prepares the next beginning. Building from the peaceful reflection, observers note that rest itself becomes an act of faith. Sleep is no longer escape, but trust. The believer lies down knowing tomorrow's battle is already known by Jesus. The same presence welcomed in the morning and honored at night remains active, even while the body rests. Spiritual analysts emphasize that consistency is where transformation is sealed. One morning shapes a day, but repeated mornings shape a life. The framework established, from the battle before sunrise or rising as light, now reveals its deeper purpose. Not a single powerful moment, but a daily rhythm that reshapes the soul over time. This chapter highlights a quiet but critical shift. Fear of tomorrow weakens. The believer no longer dreads the next morning's challenges, because they know the pattern. Silence will come again. Surrender will be possible again. Jesus will still be present before the world awakens. Confidence replaces uncertainty. Eyewitness accounts confirm that this awareness changes how one wakes up. The alarm no longer feels like an intrusion, but an invitation. Another chance to choose faith early. Another opportunity to meet Jesus before the noise returns. The morning becomes anticipated, not avoided. Observers also note a strengthening resolve. The believer understands that battles will continue, but so will victory. Tests will return, but faith has already endured. Darkness may appear, but light has proven stronger. Each completed day becomes evidence that starting with Jesus works that connects all previous stages into a living cycle. The battle alerts the soul. Silence invites God. Surrender releases weight. Clothing provides strength. Declaration establishes authority. Walking sustains connection. Testing refines faith. Rising fulfills purpose. Reflection confirms peace. Now, rising again ensures continuity. There is also a warning carried forward. Skipping the beginning weakens a cycle. Rushing into the day without Jesus slowly erodes what was built. But those who protect the morning protect the rest of their lives. The first moments remain sacred ground. As anticipation of the next dawn grows, the believer no longer asks, "Will I survive tomorrow?" The question becomes, "How will God move this time?" Expectation replaces anxiety. Faith looks forward instead of bracing for impact. Closes with a powerful declaration that echoes beyond the page. The story does not reset each morning. It advances. Those who rise again before the next dawn do not start from zero. They start from strength, memory, and trust. And with Jesus waiting once more in the quiet, the cycle of victory is ready to begin again. As another dawn approaches, this chapter reports on a realization deeper than routine and stronger than habit. This is no longer just about starting a day well. It is about reshaping an entire life. After rising again before the next dawn, the believer understands that mornings with Jesus are not isolated events. They are turning points that quietly redefine identity, direction, and destiny. Building from the rhythm established in Chapter 10, Observers note a profound internal shift. The soul no longer negotiates whether to seek Jesus first. It knows the cost of not doing so. The memory of past battles, victories, failures, and peace now forms a testimony. Experience is taught what theory never could. Mornings decide outcomes. Spiritual analysts describe this stage as maturity. The believer no longer seeks Jesus only for relief, but for alignment. Prayer is no longer driven by crisis, but by devotion. The morning becomes sacred ground, not because life is easy, but because God is faithful. The framework has moved from discipline to desire, reveals that fear has lost its former power. Challenges still exist, but they no longer define the tone of the day. Anxiety no longer wakes first. Faith does. The believer rises knowing that before the world speaks, before pressure arrives, before temptation appears, Jesus is already present. Eyewitness accounts confirm that this transformation affects more than the individual. Families feel it. Workplaces notice it. Relationships respond to it. A person who consistently begins the day with Jesus carries a stability that cannot be explained by circumstance alone. The morning prayer becomes a silent witness. Observers also note a sobering contrast. Those who neglect the morning slowly drift, reactive, weary, uncertain. But those who guard it grow steady, grounded, and resilient. This chapter does not condemn, it invites. Every sunrise remains an open door. The entire framework now stands complete and proven. The battle before sunrise awakened urgency. Silence created intimacy. Surrender released burdens. Clothing provided covering. Declaration established authority. Walking sustained faith. Testing refined endurance. Rising fulfilled purpose. Reflection confirmed peace. Continuation built rhythm. Now legacy is formed. This chapter emphasizes that the greatest victories are rarely dramatic. They are consistent, quiet, repeated. A life changed by Jesus is often shaped in unseen mornings, whispered prayers, and faithful beginnings that no one applauds, but heaven records. As a believer looks ahead, the future no longer feels threatening. Whatever comes will be met the same way every day begins, with Jesus first. The morning is no longer just a time of day. It is a statement of trust. The report closes with an undeniable conclusion. Start your day right with Jesus, and you do not just survive your days, you transform them. One morning leads to another. One prayer builds upon the last. And over time, a single faithful beginning becomes a lifetime anchored in peace, strength, and unshakable faith. Observers note that consistency creates credibility. The believer's calm is no longer questioned as coincidence. Their resilience is no longer dismissed as personality. Patterns have formed, and patterns reveal truth. A life shaped by faithful mornings produces a testimony that does not need explanation. Spiritual analysts describe this phase as overflow. The strength gained in silence now supports others in noise. The peace cultivated before dawn steadies conversations at midday. The wisdom received in prayer guides decisions that affect more than one life. The morning is no longer preparation only. It is provision. Highlights how suffering around the believer becomes more visible. Others carry fear, confusion, and exhaustion openly. In these moments, the believer does not offer empty encouragement, but embodied hope. What was learned in the battle before sunrise now equips them to stand with others in their battles. Eyewitness accounts confirm that people begin to ask questions, not about religion, but about stability. How are you still standing? Why are you calm? Where does your strength come from? These questions are not forced openings. They are invitations created by a life aligned with Jesus from the start of each day. Observers note a critical distinction here. The believer does not preach the morning. They live it. They do not advertise prayer. They reflect its results. The framework has moved beyond instruction into demonstration. The light described in earlier chapters now actively guides others. Carrying light means guarding the source. The believer understands that neglecting the morning weakens the message. Influence fades when intimacy fades. The private place remains protected because public impact depends on it. The progression of the framework becomes unmistakable. What began as survival grew into stability. Stability matured into endurance. Endurance produced character. Character now releases influence. The morning prayer proves itself not only spiritually powerful, but generationally meaningful. As days continue, the believer becomes a reference point in moments of crisis, not because they have all answers, but because they know where answers are found, before the noise, before the rush, before the world speaks. Jesus' first living becomes the unspoken message, concludes with a profound realization. The morning that once felt personal is now purposeful. Starting the day right with Jesus does more than change one life. It creates a ripple that reaches others. And in a world desperate for direction, a life anchored at dawn becomes a compass pointing unmistakably toward Christ.